أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله على رسوله المصطفى وخاتم النبيين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا، ورحمة الله وبركاته. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters. There's a saying that's attributed to Imam Hussain alayhi salam when he was addressing his enemies on the eve of Ashura. The saying is related to awakening or evoking the consciousness of the people who are opposing him. And from it we can maybe derive a number of different principles that go beyond just a regular statement. The Imam alayhi salam tells his enemies in an attempt to give them a chance to let him go, to remind them of their hereafter, and to remind them of their moral and ethical obligation towards him or towards anything in this world. The Imam tells them, إِن لَمْ يَكُنْ لَكُمْ دِينٌ وَكُنْتُمْ لَا تَخَافُونَ الْمَعَادَ فَكُونُوا أَحْرَارًا فِي دُنْيَاكُمْ. And I'm going to roughly translate it here. He says that if you have no religion or no belief, no faith, and you do not have fear of the hereafter, then at least be free in your worldly affairs. So the Imam here, he's establishing a principle, a moral and ethical standard by which not just Muslims should abide by, but it seems like the Imam is even establishing something or implying something that could be applied on the non-Muslims or non-believers as well. Now, for the longest time in history, the question of morals and ethics has occupied the mind of human beings. If we go back to the era of the Greek philosophers, or even to the ancient Egyptians, we find that ethics and morality was something that existed in each and every one of those societies. Now, when you have a necessity to, or you feel like you're obliged to act in a certain way, or you have to be ethical in your stances and in your life, there has to be a principle that would guide your actions. But before that, we have to understand where ethics stem from. Where do ethics come from? Why do human beings want to behave ethically? What makes them feel that they have to be moral agents? Is it something that exists in the nature of the human being? Or is it something that comes from outside of the human being? Some outside force, maybe religion or faith or something of that sort. Well, this question has been a debate for the longest time. And in the recent years, when the atheistic philosophy became something that's more relevant in society, the question of ethics and morality remains. And we have schools that have developed around the idea that you don't have to be religious in order to be moral. And you don't have to be religious, or you don't have to believe in God or a supreme power in order to make moral decisions. So the question that was posed over here, can there be ethics outside of religion? Can there be ethics outside of faith? Well, if we look at this saying of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, We can divide the statement into a number of different, into two main divisions. First of all, he's speaking to a nation that claimed to be Islamic. He's speaking to individuals who claim to be Muslims themselves. So the Imam tells them that religion essentially should be stopping you from doing what you're doing, killing an innocent individual, and not just any individual, the grandson of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a person who is known in your creed and your faith to be someone whose life is sanctified. And also, even if you did not believe in his sanctity, this is an innocent man and he has done nothing to you. And his family members have done nothing to you. So your religion doesn't allow you to perform such an act of murder and killing of this innocent man and his family members. So the Imam tells them that if you don't have a religion, because any person with a religion would not behave this way. Otherwise, it would be something that would push him away from this thing. And you do not fear the hereafter. And you don't have fear of the day of judgment. We have many Muslims who are religious individuals who live in the name of Islam, but the hereafter and the judgment is not part of their consciousness. It's not part of their decision-making process. So if you've lost these two things, the Imam is saying, then at least be free in your worldly affairs. So it's as if the Imam is saying that if you believe, then this should act like an extra watch over your actions, an extra incentive for you to behave in a certain way. But if you do not believe, then as a human being, and not just any human being, as a free human being, having your free conscience, you're supposed to be able to make this decision as well. Well, is the Imam implying here that we can have a moral system without faith or not? Well, let's try to look at this from a analysis. Let's try to analyze this from a logical point of view. So what we would do is we would divide the claim or the question into three possibilities. First of all, no moral judgment can be made without belief. This is a claim. We have a lot of individuals who believe that if there's no belief, you cannot have any moral judgment. But this is also something divided into two other questions. Or it's actually one question, and there's another question that would branch out of it. So is a moral judgment not being able to be done without belief the same as a moral judgment done without faith not being able to be justified or not? And let me explain what the difference between these two are. First of all, I could be someone who doesn't have any belief in faith, but I would make a moral decision. I would make a moral judgment. So for example, I would decide not to steal. And I'm not deciding that because I believe in God, or I believe in a hereafter, or I believe in some kind of religious moral code. I just think it's wrong for human beings to steal. Now, I might be able to believe that, but the question that comes is whether that can be justified or not. So meaning, why do you do that? What's the reason for you wanting to perform this ethical action or upholding this ethical standard? Do you believe in some sort of reward? No, we don't believe in some sort of reward. As a human being, what is your situation? Where do you situate yourself in this existence? If you believe that humans are just, a number of atoms or particles or some sort of physical structure in this world with no God or no origin outside of this physical world, then why would you want to do anything? Why would you want to not steal? What's stopping you from that? What is that thing that's enforcing itself upon you? So that's a question of justification. Some might say that we're allowed to believe, have moral codes without belief, but we're not able to justify it. But there are those who also try to justify it by using the evolutionary process, for example, that humans should preserve their genes, and preservation of genes would involve things like, not killing each other, not lying, and things of that sort. So the first possibility is that no moral judgment can be made without belief. The second possibility is that all moral judgments can be made without belief. This is the other extreme on the other side, that you can make any decision, any ethical and moral decision, without the necessity of having God or belief in play. The third possibility is that some moral judgments can be made without belief. Not all of them, but some of them. So we're going to go through these and examine them one by one. The first one we've briefly touched upon. The believers that defend this claim justify their actions with religion or faith. What they do over here is they say that, well, for example, let me give an example of an atheist that believes in moral judgments without faith. Peter Singer is a very famous contemporary one. He belongs to a school called the School of Consequentialism. He would say that lying, not stealing, not killing, giving water to the poor people, he has a very big campaign on that, is something that someone can do. And that is basically based upon a principle of human beings wanting happiness in their life. So having happiness is the ultimate goal of human beings. And happiness is not related to any God or any belief system. So lying would end up removing happiness from someone's life. Stealing would end up removing some happiness from someone's life. Having a chaotic society would remove happiness from someone's life. So here, happiness is used to govern the moral actions of human beings. And happiness is not related to a creed. It's not related to a system of faith. It's not related to any form of belief in God or a supernatural power. Now, in the Islamic world, we have different schools of ethics, and they've also debated this issue. And this debate also exists in other religions as well. But in the Muslim world, there are two main schools that have debated this matter. The first one, they're referred to as the Ash'arites. And the second school are the Mu'tazilis or the Mu'tazilites. And the Shia Imami scholars in this matter have sided for the most part with the Mu'tazilis. And I'll go ahead and explain the difference between the two positions. The first school, the Ash'ari school of thought, believe that morality is dependent on God and His revelation. We cannot know if something is moral or immoral unless God states it in His book and His revelation. If God doesn't tell us an action is moral or immoral, we would not be able to figure that out by ourselves. So the principle is whatever God commands is good, and whatever He forbids is evil. Let's take a look at this following verse. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ. Truly God commands justice and virtue. And then the verse continues to say, and He forbids indecency, wrong, and rebelliousness. And then the verse says, and He admonishes you that haply you may remember. The verse clearly states that it is God who commands justice and virtue. So we know that justice is a good thing, and virtue is a good thing because God commanded it. And God forbids indecency, wrong, and rebelliousness. Had God not forbade indecency, wrong, or rebelliousness, we would not have been able to figure out whether these things are good or bad. So it is God who decides what is good and what is evil. The second school, the Mu'tazilis and the majority of the Imamis, and together they refer to them as the Adliya, they maintain that good and evil are to be known, or at least for the most part, good and evil are to be known through the human intellect using the tool of reason. And in this, they don't claim to undermine God's authority, and they don't try to situate themselves in God's position. No, but they have an argument as to why they believe that reason itself is sufficient to figure out what is wrong and what is good. The principle that they abide by And it came to be known as this throughout history. And if you read books on Islamic ethics or Islamic theology, you would find a chapter on this in almost every book. The term is called al-husn wal-qubh al-aqli, the intelligibility of good and evil. If God commands humans to do something, how do we understand this? So if we look at the verse that I just read a few minutes ago, how do we deal with that? Because God in that verse is saying that He's the one who commands it and He's the one who forbids it. So God is obviously attributing the command and forbidding to Himself. God didn't just say that virtue and justice is a good thing. He said that God commands it. What they say is that in this case, God is only confirming the goodness in the act, not establishing that it's good. There's a difference between the two. One time God says that I'm establishing this rule. I'm the one who's saying that this is what's supposed to be done. So just like the 5 prayers of the Muslims throughout their day. God established that. There's no way a human being is able to understand that prayer would be obligatory unless God obliges it or makes it, legislates it for the human beings. In this verse, however, what God is doing is He's commanding in the sense of confirming, in the sense of telling human beings that you should already know that justice is a good thing, and I'm only coming and confirming this and asserting it to you and even reminding you, just as the end of the verse says. God says that you happily may remember. So it's as if that the human being knows this, and God is coming here and reminding the human beings of this. So this could be used as evidence that God is only reminding us of what we already know through our intellect, not that He's establishing a moral code that we could not have known without Him telling us. Now, one of the arguments that they use to demonstrate that the intellect is able to know things without God telling it, or in fact that it's necessary that the intellect knows things without God telling it, is to justify God's truthfulness and justice itself. Without having the intellect knowing that justice and truthfulness is a good thing, then we cannot even apply that to God. We can't even know if God is just or not. So every human being, whether he believes in religion or not, is capable of grasping the beauty of things like justice, truthfulness, repaying goodness with goodness. At the same time, every human being can grasp the ugliness of injustice, lying, repaying goodness with evil. This is part of human nature. This is the first argument. So they actually have 2 arguments. One of them is this one, and the other one is the argument that I referred to at the beginning. The main evidence for the first argument is empirical. If you go throughout history and you examine different societies and different cultures, you find that there is some sort of common ground for morality. And whether this society believes in God or doesn't believe in God or believes in different kind of deities, then you would see that this common ground exists between them. And therefore you would establish that humans are able to understand this by themselves. This is one argument, but I don't think that this is the strongest argument. I think the strongest argument that they have is the one that I mentioned at first. If humans are incapable of grasping the distinction between the goodness and the evil of a given act, and that they must refer to religion in order to perceive it, then it follows that the religious distinction between good and evil cannot be proven either. We cannot say that God commands good and forbids evil in the first place. The reason is that if the lawgiver, meaning God, informs us of the goodness of an action and the evil of another, how can we know that what he's saying is truthful? We only believe God because we believe that God would not lie, because lying is a bad thing. That's the only reason why we believe what God is saying. So we've already established before approaching God and before taking anything from God that God would not lie. Where did we get that establishment from? How did we decide that lying is a bad thing? Well, because the intellect itself is able to realize that. You see, if lying is neither good or evil in itself, then how can we know that God isn't lying when he is saying that lying is bad? You see the question, the problem over here? I think this is their strongest argument to prove this. So the Mu'tazilis, in this sense, prove that, or adopt the opinion that there are some moral judgments that can be made without faith. Or there has to be moral judgments that can be made without faith in order to justify the morality of faith in itself. So the first possibility that no moral judgment can be made without faith, we have just seen that this is not completely true. So we cancel that out. The second possibility is the opposite, the absolute on the other side. So all moral judgments can be made without faith. And I'm going to briefly talk about this so that we don't extend with the time for too long. In this claim, it says that all of the moral judgments can be made without faith. Let's take an example of justice or truthfulness. In the previous possibility, we concluded that justice in its general sense can be understood to be good through the intellect. So in that sense, we're able to understand that justice is a good thing without faith. That's true. But how about instances in which we want to apply justice? Humans differ on what justice is. So the intellect might understand that justice is a good thing. But which act is a just act? This is where human beings differ. The law of inheritance, for example. The law of dividing land in a country. The law of property. And many different laws that require something related to society as a whole. Humans would differ on this. How do we know which instance is the just instance and which is not? Religion and faith comes into role over here. And in many of these instances, such as like the law of inheritance, for example, it would tell the human beings that in your society and in your circumstances, this form of inheritance is what is just and what's not just. So it establishes a form of inheritance. It doesn't establish justice. Justice was already established through the mind. But the details and the application of this, which are also moral decisions, have to be made with faith. And this is what a religious person would argue, at least if he believes in or she believes in faith. So the second possibility is that basically no moral judgments can be made without faith. This is also not true for the most part. As for the third possibility, well, from the first and second one, we do know that there are some moral judgments that can be made with faith and some that can be made without faith. So Imam Hussein alayhi salam, when he made that statement, it's as if he's establishing this principle that there are moral judgments that even a human being without faith and without belief in God is able to make. And this allows us as human beings to interact with one another. This allows us to find a common ground and common causes between Muslims and non-Muslims, between believers and non-believers. And as a society that has become global nowadays, and our concerns as human beings have become more and more important and pressing, issues such as problems with the environment, for example. This is something that doesn't have to do with faith. This is something that every believer should partake in and support and try to protect the environment for ourselves as human beings, not just as believers in God. And there are many other causes which we believe we can be part of the supporters of these causes that benefit human beings, that help human beings as a whole, and not just a religious society. And then it becomes possible for us as religious individuals to partake in that, assisting each other and building this common and mutual love and care for each other as human beings on this planet. So it seems like the Imam is, when addressing these people, he's telling them that if you don't have faith, then you as a human being are capable of knowing that what you're doing is wrong. So at least let your consciousness tell you and stop you from doing what you're doing. But apparently, most of them didn't have this. Most of them have reached such a low level, and they've lost their consciousness. They've lost their conscience, and they've become less than what a human being is, such that even the basic understanding of a human being, the basic morality of a human being was not even present inside of them. Imam Hussein alayhi salam sent Muslim bin Aqil to study the situation in Kufa after they had sent him letters and invited him. And he wrote a letter to the people of Kufa saying, "In the name of God, the Beneficent and the Merciful, this is a letter to Hussein bin Ali from his Muslim and faithful supporters." Sorry, this is the letter that the Imam wrote, that the supporters wrote to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. They told him, "Be quick and hurry up, for the people are waiting for you, and they do not look towards anyone other than you. Hurry up, hurry up." They're emphasizing here. We repeat, make haste, and peace be upon you. On another letter, other Kufans wrote to the Imam, said that the gardens and the deserts are green and fresh, and the fruits have ripened. Proceed whenever you like. Your Iraqi soldiers are ready to receive you, and peace be upon you. So the letters started coming and piling up, and the Imam alayhi salam wanted to make sure that the Kufans are being honest with him and sincere and truthful. So he decides to send his cousin Muslim, and before he sends them, he writes a letter to them. He sends a letter beforehand informing them that Muslim is coming, his cousin, and he tells them that Muslim is my cousin and someone whom I trust in this world and in all of my affairs. And he tells them that if Muslim finds that you are truthful and that the elite of your society and those who are in charge of you also agree to what you're saying, then he would inform me and I would come. Muslim ibn Aqil was sent over there, and he was received by a lot of his supporters. And when he arrived and the news reached Yazid, it angered him because he thought that there was going to be a revolt, and he knew that if Imam Hussein gets to Kufa and he has some supporters over there, and the supporters were over 20 or 30,000 individuals, then it would cause a very big problem and disruption, and it would be a barrier to Yazid implementing his caliphate on the Islamic nation, because that was his goal. So what he does is he begins to send people to Kufa. He changes the governor, because the first governor didn't do anything about this, even though it was happening in front of him. And he sends another governor to implement the harsh rules of Yazid to stop this revolt from happening. So what he does is he goes there and he threatens everybody. And he tells them anybody who's supporting Muslim would either be tortured or killed. So people began fearing, and people began dispersing, and people began moving away from the promises that they made. You know, when you're living in a very comfortable situation, you make a promise so easily. It doesn't require any effort or anything on your part. But when it comes to difficulty, upholding that promise is where the challenge happens. And in this moment is where you become tested. And this is where we see whether you are truthful and sincere to yourself and to your promises or not. So Muslim bin Aqil, people began leaving him. And he used to pray in a masjid over there, the big masjid in Al-Kufa, and praying behind him was about, it was over 10,000 individuals were praying behind him every day. By the time he finished the Maghrib prayer that day, most of the people had abandoned him. They were abandoning him during his prayer so that he doesn't pay attention to who's leaving. And by the time that he finished the Isha prayer, there was just about 10 individuals or a bit more that were left with him. And as he walked out to the alleys, everybody had left him. Except that he walked and he was lonely at that time. Imagine, from thousands of supporters to nobody walking with him. Because imagine the type of fear that was on people's minds, and to the degree that the promise that they just made a few days ago, they completely forgot about it. And they weren't small in number. They were large in number, yet they weren't able to keep up to their promises. So Muslim was left alone, wandering the streets of Al-Kufa, and without having any aid or supporter. Muslim goes into an alley where it was a closed alley, and he sits down at the doorstep of a house. A lady comes out of that house, and that lady's name is Tawa. And she asked the individual, she doesn't know who he is. She asked him, "What are you doing sitting at the doorstep of a lady's house?" And he tells her that, "I'm a man who is alone in this city, and I have no family. But I'm thirsty. Could you bring me a cup of water, please?" So she goes in the house, and she brings him water. And he drinks the water, and he stays on the doorstep. So the lady asked him, and she told him, "Didn't you have your water?" And he said, "Yes." So she said, "Then why are you still over here?" So he tells her, "I have nowhere to go." So she asked about this individual because he's not part of the neighborhood. And she wants to know and inquire, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" So Muslim tells her who he is. And this lady was a lover of Ahlul Bayt. She was a lover of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam and Imam Hussain alayhi salam. So as soon as she found out who he is, she took him in the house. And she found out about the situation, so she decided to hide him. This lady's son, however, Bilal al-Hadrami, was a soldier in Ibn Ziyad's army. He was a greedy individual, and he would do anything for money. So he goes and he tells the army where Muslim is living. So they come and they attack the house. And because it was an alley, Muslim was able to repel most of them and kill a large number of them. But eventually they were able to catch him. And they take him to the palace, and they take him to the rooftop, and they throw him from the top of the roof. And Muslim bin Aqil was martyred at that time. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify our hearts and to be able to make us individuals who are able to grasp our responsibility in this world and work towards our hereafter. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.